Hey guys, tonight we're easing into something big. Really big. The kind of big that reshapes the entire planet while most people are just trying to get through another workday without dying of lung disease. So go ahead and dim the lights, put the phone face down, let the room settle. Tonight, we're drifting gently into the Industrial Revolution. Specifically, how Britain, this damp little island full of sheep, coal, and unresolved class resentment, accidentally rewired human existence forever. No battles, no heroic speeches, just smoke, steam, and a lot of men named John inventing machines because they were bored, broke, or both. Now, before factories, before engines, before anyone thought, what if we made children work 14 hours a day? Britain was slow, comfortably slow, painfully slow, depending on your social class. Most people lived in villages, tiny places where everyone knew your business, your mother's business, and the exact moment your cow stopped producing milk. Life followed the seasons. You woke up with the sun, you went to bed with the sun, and if you didn't, it was because you were sick, drunk, or contemplating the crushing inevitability of death. So, relatable. Work was domestic. You spun wool at home, you wove cloth at home, you farmed small strips of land that had been carved up through centuries of inheritance disputes and passive-aggressive fencing. Nothing moved fast, nothing scaled, nobody said the word productivity without sounding deeply suspicious. And the ruling class? Oh, they loved it this way. Landowners sat comfortably on their estates, sipping tea, collecting rents, and congratulating themselves on having ancestors who stabbed the right people at the right time. Everything felt eternal, which is always the first sign that it absolutely is not. Because while everyone was busy doing things the old way, Britain had a few quiet advantages stacking up in the background. Coal, for one, an absurd amount of it. Coal everywhere. Coal under fields, coal under towns, coal under places that really shouldn't have been built on in the first place. Britain also had rivers. Not dramatic rivers, not poetic rivers, practical rivers. Rivers that politely went where you needed them to go and didn't flood too aggressively. And rivers, as it turns out, are excellent for turning wheels. Then there was money. Lots of it, thanks to global trade, colonial extraction, and the occasional light plundering. Britain had capital floating around looking for something to do. And money, like water, gets restless if you don't give it a purpose. Now enter the tinkerers, the hobbyists, the men who looked at traditional labor and thought, this seems inefficient. What if we replaced most of it with metal? Textiles were first. They always are. Clothing is basic. Everyone needs it, and everyone hates making it by hand. Spinning thread used to take forever, hours upon hours of repetitive motion, the kind of work that slowly steals your soul and replaces it with quiet resentment. So when machines like the spinning jenny appeared, people were intrigued. Suspicious, but intrigued. Suddenly, one worker could spin multiple threads at once, which sounded great unless you were a hand spinner whose entire livelihood had just been made irrelevant by a wooden contraption with delusions of grandeur. This is where the tension starts. Not dramatic tension, low, simmering tension. The kind where nobody quite knows what's happening yet, but everyone can feel that something is off. Then came water frames, then power looms, bigger machines, louder machines, machines that didn't fit comfortably in cottages anymore. So the work moved, out of homes, into buildings, factories. At first, they didn't look that ominous, just large structures near rivers filled with whirring parts and optimism. But factories have needs. They need constant power. They need labor on demand. They need discipline. And villages were terrible at discipline. So people moved. Slowly at first, then all at once. Rural families packed up their entire existence and drifted toward towns that smelled like wet stone and opportunity. Cities like Manchester, Birmingham, and Leeds began swelling in ways no one had planned for. Streets appeared overnight, housing went up fast and badly, ventilation was more of a suggestion than a feature. But work was there. Reliable work. Soul-flattening work, yes, but steady. And this is where things get gently uncomfortable, because factory owners quickly realized something. Adults had opinions. Adults got tired. Adults asked for higher wages. Children, on the other hand, were small, cheap, and very easy to intimidate. So children worked. A lot. They crawled under machines, they tied broken threads, they worked hours that blurred into days. And society, collectively, shrugged because the machines were making money, and money has a soothing effect on moral outrage. Now let's slide over to steam. Water power was useful, but limited. Rivers don't always go where factories need to be, and they freeze and dry up and occasionally flood everything just to be dramatic. Steam didn't care about geography. Steam only cared about coal, and Britain had coal in deeply unreasonable quantities. Steam engines had existed for a while, mostly pumping water out of mines so miners could dig deeper for even more coal, which feels like a metaphor, but unfortunately was very literal. Then someone had the idea to make steam engines better, more efficient, less wasteful, less explodey. And suddenly, steam was everywhere. Factories no longer needed rivers. They could be built near labor pools, ports, or wherever land was cheap and regulations were imaginary. Production skyrocketed. Goods got cheaper. Clothes, tools, household items, things that had once been luxuries became ordinary. And Britain, almost by accident, became the workshop of the world. But this wasn't a golden age for everyone. Cities grew faster than sanitation, disease spread politely and constantly, cholera became a recurring guest, air turned black with soot, people lived stacked on top of each other in buildings that seemed actively hostile to human lungs. Life expectancy dipped, then dipped again, and then everyone pretended not to notice because the economy was booming. The class divide widened. Factory owners grew rich enough to buy country estates and pretend they were landed gentry now. Workers remained not that. But something subtle was happening beneath the smoke. People were learning to organize, to compare notes, to realize that if everyone was miserable, maybe it wasn't a personal failing. Ideas spread. Unions, reform movements, uncomfortable conversations about working hours, safety, and whether dying at 30 was actually necessary for national greatness. Parliament moved slowly, as it always does, but pressure mounted. And all the while, Britain kept exporting its machines, its methods, its ideas. Other nations watched closely. Some copied eagerly, some resisted, none escaped. Because once production scales up, there's no going back. Handcrafted economies can't compete with steam-powered output. Old rhythms shatter. The world begins to move faster, whether anyone is ready or not. And Britain, for better or worse, lit the fuse. Not with a single invention, not with a grand plan, but with 1,000 small decisions made by people trying to solve immediate problems without thinking too hard about the long-term consequences, which is honestly very human. So as the smoke thickens and the machines hum softly in the background, we'll let part one settle here. Factories are rising, cities are swelling, and the old world is quietly slipping away one spinning wheel at a time. In the next part, we'll drift deeper into the lives of the people trapped inside this transformation, the workers, the owners, the children, and the strange emotional landscape of a society inventing modern life without an instruction manual. But for now, just breathe slowly. Imagine the steady rhythm of pistons, and let the industrial age gently, inexorably, roll on. All right, welcome back. If you drifted off somewhere around cholera last time, that's perfect. That means it's working. So let's quietly step back into industrial Britain.
The smoke is thicker now, the machines are louder, and the optimism has matured, which is a polite way of saying everyone's tired. By the early 19th century, factories weren't novelties anymore. They were the landscape, brick after brick, window after window, all filled with spinning, clanking, thudding machinery that never slept unless it physically broke. And the people inside those buildings were learning a new relationship with time. Before this, work followed daylight. Seasons mattered. You stopped when it got dark or when your body gave up, whichever came first. Factories didn't care about daylight. They cared about output. Time became sliced, measured, disciplined. The clock ruled everything now, and the clock was not forgiving. Workers showed up when the bell rang. They left when the bell rang. If you were late, wages disappeared. If you missed a day, you might not be welcome back. This was new and deeply unsettling. Imagine generations raised to believe work was part of life, suddenly discovering life was now scheduled around work. It did not go over smoothly. Let's talk about the mills for a moment. Textile mills especially. Tall buildings, endless floors, rows of machines so close together that personal space became a distant memory. The air inside was warm, wet, lint-filled. Cotton fibers floated constantly, coating lungs in a fine white layer of future regret. Noise was constant, not loud in a dramatic way, just endless, a mechanical roar that slowly erased the concept of silence from your brain. Conversation became shouting, then gestures, then nothing. And this environment shaped people, physically and emotionally. Now, let's gently address the children again, because yes, they're still here, and no, it's not great. Children worked because families needed the income, also because factory owners insisted children were better suited to the work. Smaller hands, more flexible bodies, less likely to unionize. Children worked 12, 14, sometimes 16 hours a day. They slept when they could, ate when they were allowed, learned very quickly not to get caught in machinery. Injuries happened. Often. But they were treated as inconveniences, not tragedies. If a child lost a finger, there was always another child. Education became optional, which is generous. Mostly it vanished. And society rationalized this beautifully. Children were being taught discipline. They were contributing to the family. They were learning useful skills. And if they died young, well, life expectancy was low anyway, so let's not make a fuss. Adults weren't exactly thriving either. Men worked heavy machinery. They lifted, they hauled, they repaired things mid-operation because stopping production cost money. Women worked too, a lot, often for lower wages, often while pregnant, often expected to return to work shortly after childbirth because rent did not pause for recovery. Home life shrank. People left before sunrise, returned after dark. Meals became functional. Sleep became shallow. Family relationships adjusted accordingly. Parents saw children less. Spouses passed like ships in the night, both exhausted, both quietly resentful. Alcohol filled the gaps. Gin was cheap. Beer was safer than water. Pubs multiplied. Moral reformers complained loudly. Industrialists nodded politely. Nothing changed. Now let's drift upward for a moment, to the factory owners, because their lives were different. Factory owners often started as merchants or skilled craftsmen. They weren't aristocrats at first. They were practical people who noticed machines made money. A lot of money. They built factories, then more factories, then houses far away from those factories. Large houses, clean houses, quiet houses. They hired managers to deal with workers so they wouldn't have to. They talked about progress, innovation, national strength. And, to be fair, they weren't wrong. Britain was growing absurdly wealthy. Exports exploded. Textiles flooded global markets. British goods undercut local industries everywhere they went, which meant prosperity at home and economic disruption everywhere else. But let's stay local for now. With wealth came anxiety. Factory owners worried constantly about strikes, about sabotage, about workers organizing. And workers did organize. Slowly, clumsily, illegally. Early unions were secretive. Meetings happened quietly, often in pubs or homes. People used coded language because collective bargaining was seen as dangerous, almost revolutionary. There were protests, marches, occasional machine-breaking episodes where frustrated workers expressed their feelings using hammers. The government responded with laws, harsh laws, designed to protect property, and by property, they meant machines. People could be imprisoned for organizing, transported, or worse. Reform came slowly, painfully, but cracks appeared. Reports emerged, investigations, parliamentary committees listened to testimony from workers, doctors, and occasionally children who were already decades too old for the work they'd done. Descriptions of injuries, exhaustion, deformities. Public discomfort grew. Not outrage, discomfort. Enough to pass mild regulations, limits on child labor hours, factory inspections, rules that were often ignored but at least existed. And this pattern repeated over and over. Abuse, exposure, minimal reform, repeat. Meanwhile, cities continued swelling. Housing remained inadequate. Tenements crammed families into single rooms. Privacy disappeared. Disease thrived. Water systems lagged behind population growth. Waste accumulated. The smell became a constant companion. But cities also created something new. Crowds. And crowds share ideas. Political movements grew louder. Working-class identity sharpened. People began thinking of themselves not just as laborers, but as a class, which made the ruling classes very nervous, because once people realize their suffering isn't unique, things tend to happen. Still, for many, daily survival prioritized abstract change. You worked, you slept, you repeated. Hope was quiet, if it existed at all. And yet, beneath all of this, something irreversible was happening. People were becoming modern. They thought in hours, not seasons. They depended on wages, not land. They lived among strangers instead of extended families. The old social bonds weakened, new ones formed, and the machines kept humming. So we'll leave part 2 here, in the thick of it, in the mills, in the streets, in the slow realization that this wasn't a phase. In the next part, we'll float outward, beyond Britain, to see how this strange new way of living began to infect the rest of the world. But for now, just let the noise soften, the machines fade into a distant rhythm, and rest in the knowledge that history rarely asks permission before changing everything.
All right, welcome back. This is the last stretch. No new machines, no new smoke. Just the quiet realization of what all of this became. By the mid-19th century, Britain had done it. It had crossed the line from a country with factories to a country that runs on factories. There was no ceremony, no announcement, no moment where someone rang a bell and said, "Congratulations, everyone, you now live in modernity." It just happened. Steam power spread everywhere, not just textiles anymore. Ironworks, shipbuilding, railways. Ah, yes, the railways. If factories changed how people worked, railways changed how people thought. Before trains, distance mattered a lot. Travel was slow, uncomfortable, weather-dependent. You planned your life around how long it took to get anywhere. Then trains arrived and said,
Politely, but firmly, no. Suddenly, cities were connected. Goods moved faster than ever. Food could be shipped before it rotted. People could leave their hometowns and still come back. Time itself had to be standardized. Local time stopped making sense when trains ran on schedules, so Britain synchronized its clocks. Everyone, for the first time, agreed on now. And that's a deeply underrated revolution. Railways also rearranged landscapes. Towns boomed or died depending on where tracks went. Noise followed the lines. Opportunity followed the noise. And Britain exported railways the way it exported textiles. Tracks spread across Europe, across colonies, across continents. With them came British engineers, British capital, British assumptions about how work, profit, and progress should function. Other countries industrialized, some eagerly, some reluctantly, some under pressure. Factories appeared in France, in Germany, in the United States. Each adapted the model, tweaked it, improved it. But the core idea stayed the same. Machines first, humans adapt. Back in Britain, things slowly improved. Not quickly, not evenly, but noticeably. Child labor laws tightened, working hours shortened, public health reforms emerged, mostly because too many people were dying too publicly to ignore. Sewers were built, water systems improved, cities learned, awkwardly, how to support large populations without constant catastrophe. The middle class expanded. Clerks, managers, engineers, people whose jobs involved paperwork instead of pistons. Education followed, not because of compassion, but because machines now required literate operators. Politics changed too. More people demanded a say. Voting rights expanded, slowly, grudgingly. Power shifted inch by inch. And the old aristocracy adapted. They always do. They invested in industry, married into industrial wealth, pretended they had always supported innovation. History is generous like that. By the end of the 19th century, Britain was rich, powerful, overextended, confident. It had reshaped the global economy, redefined labor, accelerated life. And it couldn't stop. Because here's the thing about the Industrial Revolution. It never ended. We talk about it like a chapter, a period, something with a neat beginning and a tidy conclusion. But once humans learned to scale production, once they learned to measure efficiency, once they taught machines to multiply effort, that was it. Every technological leap since then is just an echo. Electricity, assembly lines, computers, automation. Same rhythm, different tools. Work gets faster, life speeds up, society adjusts, badly at first, and individuals cope. The people who lived through the first Industrial Revolution didn't think of themselves as pioneers. They were tired, overworked, confused. They didn't know they were building the modern world. They were just trying to survive it, which is honestly how most history works. So as we let this story fade out, imagine the sound softening, the steam hissing lower, the wheels turning steadily, no longer urgent. Britain didn't change the world because it planned to. It changed the world because it found a faster way to do things. And faster has a way of spreading. And here we are, still living inside that momentum, still measuring time by clocks, still working to rhythms set centuries ago. So rest now. Let the machines idle. Let the smoke thin. This was the Industrial Revolution, quietly relentless, accidentally permanent. And tomorrow, well, tomorrow comes right on time.